Hello! In this video I want to show you how to create these sounds with the Waldorf Iridium. The first sound that I want to show you is that one. It is rather simple, and as always I start from the init patch. On the Iridium you reach it by hitting load and then pressing init on the display. I am playing an A minor chord on the keyboard for this sound, but it's also possible to use the chord function. So if you hit chord and select the root note to A, you can go through different chords here on these pads. Actually, I'm not sure if they are outputted through the MIDI output. When I'm recording music, I'm always using the keyboard because I only have the MIDI in connected for the Iridium. But for sound design, it's very nice to hit these buttons here on the Iridium. The patch design of this sound is very simple. I could use the sawtooth waveform on oscillators 1 and 2. But instead I take a wavetable that I stole from Xerom. It's possible to import wavetables on the Iridium, and this one is called Basic Mini, and I think it's modeled after the Minimoog synthesizer. And if you select the sawtooth there and compare it to the sawtooth of the waveform engine, you will notice that it has a slightly darker tone. So this is the waveform of the Iridium and the Basic Mini wavetable. It's not that much of a difference, but I really like these waveforms, so I'm using them for both oscillator 1 and 2. So let me load the wavetable here as well. And now I have the same wavetable on oscillators 1 and 2. And on oscillator 2, I tune them down 1 octave, 12 semitones. It's also possible to click this button and jump there directly, but and then I mix them. Usually I have the higher oscillator, in this case oscillator 1, a bit louder than the sub oscillator, like this. And on the third oscillator I'm using the waveform engine, and I select white noise and I blend it in just a little bit. So this is for the oscillators. In the filter section I select the PPG filter, and I also select the 24 decibel low pass filter and take away the resonance. And what I now want to do is to automatically move the filter like this. And it should not be with an envelope, because I want this effect to constantly shift during my track. So I'm using an LFO. You can access the LFO by moving the select wheel of the Iridium, of the LFO section, and I go to a very slow value here. And very important is that you set the mode from poly to global. If you set it on poly, it means that the LFO is triggered with every new note. So every time you press a note, the LFO will start here at the beginning. Let me demonstrate this. So I select the LFO1 here in the mod matrix and go look for the filter. Don't ask me why it's hidden. So here somewhere. So now the filter is modulated by the LFO, but every time I hit a key, you see that the filter moves up. Every time. Why is that so? Because the mode is on poly, which means every time you press a note, the LFO starts. I don't want that. I want that to be on global, which basically means that you have only one LFO that is free running. This LFO is always making this movement and it does not care for incoming note signals. So each time I press a note, you see that the LFO is at a different phase. Sometimes the filter starts to move up, sometimes it starts to move down when I press a note. And this is what I want for this sound. Now it's much too fast, so I reduce the speed until I like it. That is nice. Maybe the effect is a bit too much, so I reduce the amount here in the mod matrix. Yeah, this is cool. Last thing, I go to the amp envelope and select a very slow attack. I also changed the attack curve from this default setting to linear, so that it sounds like this. Then I use the sustain and bring it down a bit, also for shorter decay and of course some release. I think this is cool. And now I still want to reduce the speed. It's still too fast for my taste. So let's take a look at what I did with the sound in Ableton. The actual pattern is very simple. It's just one note that is being played every 2 bars. It's not quantized. I was playing this by hand, and since the attack phase is very long and very slow, the sound, the actual note, is a bit before the beat. So it's not exactly on point of each beginning of every 2 bars. Instead, it's a bit ahead. I'm only having one note here because I'm using this chord plugin that transforms any note that you play into a minor chord if you use these settings with +3 and +7 semitones, because a root note +3 and +7 semitones means a minor chord. Of course, a sound like this needs some effects, and in this case I was using the delay and vintage verb from Valhalla DSP. You can pause the video and copy the settings if you like, but it's nothing too special. It's an 8th dotted delay with some feedback in tape delay mode, that is important, and also some, I think, standard, I think it's even the init patch from Vintage Verb with some minor changes. And after that I have a compressor here that is in sidechain mode and listens to the kick drum of the pattern. And altogether it sounds like this. Much more interesting is the second sound, which sounds like that. Let's start with the init patch again by hitting load and going to init. I select my chord again. And in this sound I was using wavetables. So I was selecting a wavetable from the Iridium that is called Transient. Sounds a bit like an organ, but I think I used this position here. And I was also using the same wavetable on the oscillator 2. But in this case, I tuned it up 7 semitones. And I have the first oscillator louder than the second one, because this is the fundamentals and this is more like the overtones of the patch. So goes like this. And then to support this a little bit, I was using a standard sawtooth waveform 1 octave down to give it some bass, some fundamental frequencies. So much for the oscillators. Let's move to the filter. I'm selecting the PPG filter again and bring down the filter until I don't hear the sound anymore. And then I'm bringing up the envelope amount of filter 1. You see that you have 2 rows of attack, decay, sustain and release. And with this select button you can move through them, so you have 6 envelopes in total. And the filter 1 is in this row, and by adding a positive value to the envelope filter amount, the filter moves every time you hit a note. I always take a bit shorter decay. I think this sounds nice. And then, of course, some release for the envelope, so that the sound is not cut off when you stop playing a note. This is very nice, but this is a bit static for my taste. So what I'm doing now is I take the first envelope and I address the first envelope to the decay of filter 1. It's somewhere down here. And of course nothing happens because the LFO is still set to poly. If you set it to global, now it's a bit too much. Yeah, this is cool. So if this is a pattern later, the decay of the filter will be modulated with the LFO. Then I also want to bring some resonance, but not too much. I think when it's more than 20%, it really does not sound too well on the Iridium. Sounds very digital, but with very low settings, it's actually nice. So, something else that would be cool would be to modulate the cutoff frequency with the velocity. And so if you use the keyboard to play the notes, you can also control and modulate and bring more life to the patch by using different velocity settings. It's also possible to use a random function in the clip. If you're using Ableton or Bitwig or a hardware sequencer, sometimes it's possible to use different velocity settings or modulate them with the random LFO or a random whatever, and so you can add more variation to the sound, because in dub techno music you're always using one pattern and you play it for 10 minutes and you need some variation and you need some stuff that keeps slowly shifting the sound, and modulating something with the velocity could be a good way to do this. Now it's a little tea break. You should also have some tea, I think. Tea is good. And also need to adjust the camera mount again. Yeah. I think now you can see. Yeah, so this is the mod matrix again. I think you cannot see what's highlighted because it's like, you can actually see it very well on the actual unit, but it's my camera is not too good, so yeah, I need to move this away. Now I want to have a second filter. So I want this signal that's coming out of my low pass filter, and this signal should go into a second filter. Keep in mind that on the Iridium, these filters 1 and 2 are always in parallel mode, so they are not like filter 1, filter 2, and the signal goes from one to the other. It's always in parallel mode. So to have this filter 1 into filter 2 thing, you need to use the digiformer. And the digiformer is possible to load different filters, also some bit crushers, comp filters, lots of interesting stuff to discover. But I only want to have a plain simple bandpass filter in this case. I think this is nice. In this case, the amount knob is changing the frequency of the filter, and the color knob is changing the resonance. You have always the right, correct names of the parameters displayed here on the display, but of course the label on the panel does not change. That would be something. And I want this to change. And now you could say, okay, great, just take another LFO, LFO2, and select the digiformer amount as a modulation destination. That sounds crazy. Of course, global. But then you kind of hear how the LFO moves the filter, and I don't want that. So let's deactivate this for a while. And now I will do something special. I will use the sequencer to modulate the filter. So I go to the sequencer by hitting the sequencer button. And then you see that there is a parameter called mode. And when you press this, you can select something that is called parameter sequencer. So now the sequencer is not triggering any notes, and nothing happens if you hit play on your sequencer. But instead, you see that each time you press a note, there is something moving here. And with this first knob, you can, with the big knob, you can select these steps, and then you can randomly add some parameters, however you would like to have them. After I entered some steps, I'm setting the sequence length to 7. Why 7? Because 7 is something different than 8. And if you have an 8-note sequence and a 7-step length of this parameter sequencer, you have constant permutation of your modulation. So in each bar of your sequence, the modulation will sound different. So always try to have a different length of the modulation sequence compared to the notes that you have in your sequence. So now I have entered this sequence, and you see that each time I press a note, it moves to the next position. Of course, we don't hear something yet because we need to put this somewhere in the modulation matrix. So I had this LFO2 set to the digital former amount, which is the cutoff frequency. But now I'm selecting the parameter sequence lane 1. As you can see, there are 8 different sequence parameters, so you could modulate a lot of interesting stuff with it. And now see what happens. Each time I press a note, the filter jumps to a new position. This effect could be a bit more drastic, so I'm increasing the amount here. This is quite nice. So let's move to Ableton again to see what I did with this sound in the context of my track. This is the pattern that I recorded with the sound. And I had the same effect chain that I showed you before with the Valhalla delay and the vintage verb. And the last thing that I did is a little special trick. These effects are here on the channel, but I'm also having another delay on a return channel. And this delay is a bit different because it's set to 16th note. No triplets, no dotted, no nothing, just the 16th note. And let me deactivate this again. So the send sounds like that. You also see that I took away a lot of the low frequencies here. And added some reverb. And what I'm doing with this pattern, let me first duplicate it. Is I'm using the record function of, there are different ways to do this. The first one would be to enable the automation recording and manually move this knob like this. So now we have one of this, I would call it fast delay bursts with every pattern. So if you go for the automation mode, you see that the send is now here on this position. And each time it sounds a bit different because we had so many modulations here in the sound on the Iridium. And this delay burst here will never sound exactly the same because of all the modulations that I did in the modulation matrix. So remember the sequencer that modulates the bandpass filter, remember the velocity that modulates the cutoff, and the LFO modulating the decay of the filter. For my performance, I was recording both of the sounds to dedicated audio tracks because I need these different filter and effect settings in Ableton, and unfortunately the Iridium has only one audio output, so all together with the drums sound like this. So I guess this could be the starting point of a track, and of course you would need more sounds and some arrangement work, but I think it's a good starting point for making a dub techno track. A lot of you will ask about the drums in the comments, so I will quickly show this. It's a very basic and simple pattern. The kick drum is an 808 sample from Samples from Mars. And I was using the tuner to see what note it's playing, because the 808 is usually has a very clear pitch. You can really hear the pitch, and the chords that I was playing on the Iridium are in A, so the kick drum should be somewhere around A as well. So I used the transpose feature to set it one semitone higher. I think the original sample is in A flat, and that would sound a bit not so cool. So I was tuning it to A. You see, I also shortened it a little bit with the fade out, but it's a very long tail here. Then I was copying this sound to a second slot, and I tuned this +7, so you remember the +1 from the original kick drum, so this is +8, so you have, it's also a bit quieter. I lowered the volume. So these two sounds together, kick drum and bass, sound like this. And to add some groove, I added another low sound. It's a tom, also from the 808, and with the rest of the kick drum and bass, it sounds like that. You also see that I put it a bit behind, a bit late. That would be called swing, I guess. And then, of course, some rim shot. Originally, it would sound like that. It's the classic 808 rim shot, but I added a high pass filter and moved the sample start point so that you only have this clicking sound. And I put this on the 2 and 4 of the beat. Very subtle, not too loud. And then there is a 16th note shaker, which is only this 808 sound as well. So I was only using 808 sounds for this pattern. And here I added also some swing. I think I did it manually, not with the grooves. But you see on the 2 and 4 of each bar, the sounds are a bit late. So altogether it sounds like that. Okay, so this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and see you next time.